So 2 weeks ago, Sebastian stated that the Wimbledon is the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world. His secondary claims to support this was its respectful reputation, audience, and history gave it such a status. The statement is not a claim of fact, but a claim of value, making it possible for any tournament to be the most prestigious. It all just depends on your opinion. I'm here today to inform you that the Wimbledon is not the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world. I will defend this statement by responding to each of Sebastian's secondary claims, starting with his belief that the highest achievement for tennis players gives it the respectful reputation. The reason he believes it's the highest achievement is because of its difficulty. The only evidence he uses to support such a statement is the fact that the tournament is played on grass, making it more difficult than others, supported by collegesports.com. However, stated by the International Tennis Federation, grass courts favor the server of volley style of play. So players who do not favor this style have an unfair disadvantage to those who do favor such a style. This is not just a problem for grass courts, but clay courts as well. Clay courts, like that of the French Open, are favored by baseline players who generate a heavy spin and shot. Pete Sampras, the king of swings in tennis, would be a good example of the bias these courts have. He has won 14 Grand Slam titles, has been #1 ranking in tennis for 6 consecutive years, and has won over $43 million of prize money, stated by the Association of Tennis Professionals. But he has never won once the French Open, which is another tournament held of one of the 4 Grand Slams. With this information, we can conclude that to Pete Sampras, the most difficult tennis tournament is the French Open. With Sebastian's claim, the most difficult tennis tournament is the most prestigious. In Pete's eyes, the most prestigious tournament would be then the French Open, not the Wimbledon. His secondary claim is that the audience attending makes it the most prestigious. If we compare the audience to the other Grand Slam tournaments, the Wimbledon falls short in multiple categories. Television ratings, stated by Forbes magazine, is French Open and US Open tied first, with Wimbledon falling below. Capacity size for audience, US Open has more than 23,000, where Wimbledon only has 14,000, stated by Rare magazines. If we're looking at numbers, then the US Open trumps over Wimbledon, and then such being the most prestigious. His final secondary claim is that because of tradition, extensive history, it is the most prestigious tennis tournament. He backs this statement up with 2 main traditions, the all-white attire and the strawberries and cream. Wimbledon is not the only tennis tournament with traditions and history. Every single tournament has its own. Like the US Open, stated by TennisTours.com, its one tradition is it is the first tournament in the Grand Slam to feature night matches and play nights more than any other tennis tournament. Another would be Arthur Ashe Kids Day. It is held just before the US Open and kicks off the festival by honoring the late Arthur Ashe with several exhibition matches aiming at supporting charities. When it comes to history, the French Open has its own. Beginning in the late 1800s, just like the Wimbledon. Another example of its history is it is the first of the Grand Slams to be in the open era, which is not just letting amateur tennis players participate, but professionals as well. All stated by the Roland Garros, the official French Open website. The US Open has tradition, the French Open has history. Couldn't either one of these be considered the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world? Wimbledon is not the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world. Every tournament has reputation, has an audience, and has history. This means any tournament can be the most prestigious in the world. It all depends on who says it to be true. Thank you for listening.
All right, well, it's nicely organized, easy to follow. I like the contrast that you provided to the different tournaments. The one thing I think we can clearly decide is that the Australian Open has not got any redeeming qualities at all, because you don't defend it one iota, so so we either got Wimbledon, the French Open, or the US Open, and Australia lags behind apparently in fourth place. I thought that the argument about it being a value claim was a legitimate point to make. I think you need to explain a little bit more why it's a value claim, saying it's just an opinion. We talked about that before. All arguments are opinions, but this is an opinion about what has worth or merit to it, and there's an argument about what the criteria are that you're using. Now, ultimately, you do argue the criteria. I just think that if you're going to make the argument about the criteria, that should be in that general counterclaim issue. And then you argue the criteria, and I thought you did that pretty effectively. If it's difficulty measured by grass, you explain why that's not necessarily the case. It favors a particular kind of player. Pete Sampras, for instance, I appreciate your reference to Pete Sampras. Most of these people in here have no idea who Pete Sampras was, but he's one of those guys who was, a famous tennis player, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and everybody else going, who? That kind of stuff. But the reference, he got 14 Grand Slams, and he was ranked number 1 for 6 years, and he won all this money, but he never won, the French Open. So from his point of view, that's the most difficult to win and be victorious at. So he would probably see that as the most prestigious tournament because that's the most difficult. Is difficulty the standard by which we're going to go by? According to the advocate standard, then from another person's point of view, it's going to be a little bit different there. And the other thing that you might want to look at is whether or not there were ever exceptional players. For example, like Pete Sampras, if there are players that are recognized as being exceptional and they never won Wimbledon, and then Wimbledon is frequently won by people who never do well anyplace else but just on the grass, I think that would go a long way towards showing that this is really a unique situation, and uniqueness is not necessarily the same thing as prestigious. And that's kind of the argument that you're making. I'm just saying here's some other stuff that could have gone along to help make the same point that you're arguing. On the second point, I thought that you did an interesting thing. When they're talking about the audience attending, they're maybe talking about, I don't know, the Queen showing up or whoever happens to be there. But I thought you went in a very interesting direction. Let's look at TV ratings. Let's look at attendance. You got 12,000 more people going to the U.S. Open. The TV ratings are much higher for the French Open and the U.S. Open, and Wimbledon doesn't get nearly that kind of numbers. So how are we measuring prestige here? Because somebody, some celebrity went to this particular tournament. Well, I don't, that seems like a pretty arbitrary standard, and you should argue that my standard on audience is much more objective, and therefore that's the one that you ought to be using. And then on the third point, I thought that you did a nice job just talking about other traditions and suggesting the fact that you have a tradition doesn't necessarily make it better. Everybody's got some kind of tradition. Why is one tradition more valuable than another? Maybe the tennis white seems like it's something that's interesting from a visual point of view. I don't know that strawberry and cream means anything. The Arthur Ashe tournament thing, I think you might want to explain why that is an important tradition. You kind of leave that out. We know that it happens, but why is that an important thing? If you're familiar with tennis, you would know why the Arthur Ashe issue is a little bit more important. And then, the French Open, it's been around as long. I thought the idea that it is the first real true Open that allows both amateurs and professionals to play simultaneously, that's something that's important. And I don't know, when did Wimbledon become an Open like that, or did it ever become an Open? Is it only exclusively to people who are in a particular category? And then suddenly, is exclusivity the thing that makes it prestigious, or is it the competitiveness that makes it prestigious? And then that would support your argument a little bit more. All right, thank you.